Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of GIA, the podcast. We are your hosts, Harsha Sankaran and
Fiza Harsha, and we have a very exciting guest with us today. We have founder and CEO of Together We Remember, David Estrin, here with us. If you'd like to say hi, introduce yourself real quick.
Hi there. Thanks for having me on the podcast. It's an honor to join you. My name is David Estrin. I'm coming to you from the land that is known as Boston these days, but I want to begin with a land acknowledgement that I am coming to you from the original homelands of the Mashpee, Wampanoag, Aquinnah, Wampanoag, Nipmuc, and Massachusetts tribal land. Which I think is super important given the work that we do. Speaking of which, I do lead Together We Remember. It's a movement to empower the next generation of leaders to make never again a reality, so that hopefully by, let's say, the year 2048, the 100-year anniversary of the Genocide Convention and UN Declaration of Human Rights, we live in a world in which identity-based violence is no longer the norm in our world. Absolutely. So that's a little bit about me and us.
We will go ahead and do our land acknowledgements as well. I would like to appreciate the generations of the Kikapoi, Taubakoni, and Wichita who have graciously nurtured this land for so long.
And I'm coming to you from Houston, Texas, which was belonging to the Karankawa Nation. And I'd like to, of course, appreciate and honor them in today's podcast. So let's go ahead and transition to our questions today for David. Harsha, you can start us off with the questions, right?
Sure, I'd love to. Let's go ahead and hit the foundation first. So, David, what is your faith journey? How do you identify, or do you identify with a certain faith? How did it start and how did it grow?
Yeah, so I identify as a Jewish man. I use he, him pronouns. I really consider myself mostly a cultural Jewish person. Mm-hmm. I grew up very much in the faith and the religion of I grew up in Boca Raton, Florida, which, if folks know about Boca Raton, there are a lot of Jewish people who live there. In grade school, I was at a Jewish day school, so I grew up in the context of Judaic studies, took trips to Israel. We celebrated most of the Jewish holidays in my home, Friday night, Shabbat. We weren't Orthodox, so we didn't, like on Saturdays, we didn't keep what's called Shomer Shabbos, meaning we did use technology. It was interesting. In my house, we were kosher, which meant that we didn't eat pork products and various shellfish and other things. But out of the house, we were not kosher. So that was interesting, right? It's like contradictions. It's like, so what are we doing here? And as I grew up, that sort of waned. But that was sort of the context of my upbringing. I would say it evolved over time, especially when I got to know my grandpa's story much better. All four of my grandparents were Holocaust survivors, so that has really factored into my identity and my experience with faith. When I was 14 or 15 for an English class project, we had to interview one of our heroes, and I interviewed my grandpa. And I asked him, "Do you believe in God?" During that interview, and he shared his story of survival. And he said, "No, I don't believe God would do, if a God existed, that he would do what happened to the Jewish people." And so that was sort of like my rupture in faith as a teenager. And that was that followed 2 trips to the Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria, where my grandpa was imprisoned, right? Ever since, I've been on a journey to kind of make sense of my own perception of faith. My hero didn't believe in God, and he still went to temple. And we're like, well, why is he doing that? And what he told me is, while he didn't believe in God, he still believed in the Jewish people. And so that became sort of my baseline, and why I became so passionate about Holocaust education and collective memory. And when I got older, I took a trip to Israel later in high school, and I got to actually see some of like the OG territory where allegedly some of the spiritual events happen. And I was like, oh, that's plausible. That mountain actually exists. Oh, cool, Mount Noah. I'm like, all right, you have me. I'll consider it. I would say overall, I've kind of moved from like the, by the letter of the book sort of Judaism to a more open-ended mystical sense of spirituality, in which Judaism is one of many religions that holds aspects of a true spirituality that is out there and that I am continuing to seek and be open to.
Gosh, it was such a good answer. And I just love how you phrased everything. And I think it just really speaks to what different circumstances can do to our faith and how they change. I know it's also kind of this like, do you come out of something thinking, because I did that, now I can do anything? Or is it something that sort of breaks your confidence? And I think in that sense, it's kind of also the same thing with God, that sometimes things happen in our lives and we're like, there's no way that there could be a God. And that's all good and that's all knowing and knows my pain and who would, inflict this upon me almost. And then on the other hand, there are people who sort of lean into that more. So it's always such an interesting thing to see how faith evolves depending on what circumstances you go through. And obviously, there's no right answer, especially for somebody who has survived something like the Holocaust. Anyone who survives something that traumatic, there's never a right way to react. But I think it's just so interesting how faith changes in that and how it can grow stronger or just disappear almost.
Yeah, jumping off of that, I've met many survivors of not just the Holocaust, but different genocides and atrocities. And some grow closer to faith because of the experience, and others go much further away from their faith. And I think it's important to we sort of respect the beliefs of those who've come out of those experiences and provide them the space to find their own method of healing, and listen in that way. While we may have different perspectives, there's a lot that we might be able to learn from that. And it really poses a question of resilience, and also, from where do we potentially find hope? Some found hope in something that might be out there, and others found hope within themselves or with respect to humanity. So just a couple of other thoughts.
Yeah, and I think that just speaks to what we were talking about in terms of when we introduced this podcast, that one of our focuses was to make sure that we had a spectrum of faith, regardless of where you stand on that, whether you're completely atheist or you're just 100% soaked in the Lord. It's just all about the spectrum, and regardless of where you are welcome here. So thank you for adding that perspective.
Can I actually jump in with a thought? I don't want to forget this. I think you're
Yeah.
you're putting on the table this question of, is God or the gods that are out there, are they inherently good, or not? And the thing that came to my mind was like, could God or the essence out there be mostly? I would probably start with a baseline of curious, and what I mean by that is potentially some larger power is just really curious. If I set up these conditions with these humans, what would happen? Will they rise to the occasion, or will they consume themselves and the beautiful world that they live in? Which could be, it statistically could be, the only Earth that is capable of doing what it is doing now, or it could be one of many. And we don't know. And I find it's very interesting to think about it that way, especially when I think about our bridge building work. What does it mean to look at those that we seem to oppose or not understand, with less judgment, and kind of inherently looking at shame, but shifting more towards curiosity to understand. And I think I'm looking forward to thinking more curiously about spirituality.
Yeah. And I think, maybe Fiza, maybe we should have done that episode with David that we tried to record the other day, because she was talking about all these things that keep her up at night. And I think this is exactly what she was talking about. So thank you for adding some thoughts for us to sort of marinate on. Jumping off of that, let's speak more about your work. What would you say are the most important facets of it? And how would you say your faith plays a role in it? Because as you said, it changed throughout your life and it's meant different things to you at different times. So where do you stand at this moment?
Yeah, so when it comes to the work, as I said it earlier on, we are trying to pursue what we call Mission 2048, so that in the year 2048, we live in a world without identity-based violence, which is an ambitious goal. We're aiming for the stars to land on at least the moon, and if we have not finished the work, then we will pass it on to future generations, just like our ancestors have done. for us. But we wanted to pose that question of, if we were to work for 30 years straight towards that goal, like, how would you actually get there? What would need to change from a policy perspective, from a community perspective, um, locally, regionally, nationally, internationally, in the realms of atrocity prevention, rapid response, and ultimately in truth and reconciliation? And what we realized is the realm of collective memory has so much potential to have an impact on our ability to prevent and respond to atrocities, right? So much of the issues we're seeing play out in the United States and around the world are coming around a contested perception of what the truth is. And we, to be honest, just have not faced the full legacy of genocide and atrocity that has been perpetrated on this land, against indigenous peoples, as well as the Black community in the United States. And there are others who've experienced other types of atrocities as well. And the Jewish community is vulnerable, as well, as we saw in Pittsburgh and Poway, and in the rise in hate crimes statistics. And so, as far as our work goes, we are all about gathering communities in person and online, to counter hatred in all of its forms. And we do that through community remembrance projects, that are local and or in the virtual realm, now that we live in, the COVID era. And some of y'all were part of that. And we organized 30 days of virtual events during April, which is Genocide Awareness Month, and that's when we really activate our entire global community in solidarity. And we concluded that month with a 24-hour global virtual vigil with over 50 human rights organizations, who in each hour were able to feature different stories of survival, of upstanding, of upstandership, I guess. Did I just make up a word? Of fighting with justice in mind. But it all really starts with, first off, acknowledging, documenting, and preserving a common understanding of how we got here, the truth. How spirituality fits into that for me. Starting a nonprofit's extremely hard. It's harder than I expected. I've been at it now full time for about 4 years. And there are crises of faith all along the journey. Every year, I feel like over the summer, when it's the quieter time for our organization, I have a lot of time, alone time in my mind. I'm like, can I really do this? Something that's come up again and again is this question of, I know the work is worthy, but am I worthy of the work? Am I good enough to actually be successful at pursuing the mission of this organization? And if I fail, do I let down everyone, my grandparents, our ancestors who perished in the Holocaust, everyone who perished in the Holocaust, everyone who's ever perished in a genocide or an atrocity? It's a lot to have on your shoulders. And so I think it was important for me to shift and come at this work from a place of love and light and opportunity, rather than feeling like the burden of all humanity is on my shoulders. And of course, I'm not the only one doing this work. I stand on the shoulders of giants, and there's so many others with whom we band together. But I do have to say that some aspects of spirituality do factor in. Like I said, I have been exploring more Jewish mysticism, and crazy things have happened in my life. So I sometimes I'm just like, you know what? Like, this seems like a coincidence, but what if it's not? Just be curious, go with it.